Then there is other mechanisms that I would just summarize as acetylation. There's methylation. There is sulfation. Then there is mechanisms that are not named so far, but that I will try to describe. Like one of them is a simple mineral-based mechanism, and that is that metals can attach in the system only in places that are meant to be attached to by metals. Now, in the absence of good metals, like magnesium and zinc, and copper and manganese, iron.
What people think of as minerals.
Minerals,
which are
yeah.
actually metals.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Minerals are the same as metals. Yeah.
Right.
We call them minerals if they're existing in a biological system. We call them metals if they're outside a biological system. But in terms of the physics and chemistry, it's still a metal. So when a magnesium is missing, let's say inside a cell, there's a vacant place. And that place has a high affinity for a two-valent metal. That means a metal that, like magnesium, is missing 2 electrons, Mg2+.
Okay.
And the more vacancies you have, the more mineral depleted you are, the more the body will suck up toxic minerals to fill these places.
Okay.
Or a simple foundational rule, and you're beautiful in making those understandable to people, is this simple rule. The body functions better with toxic metals than no metals at all. Period.
Okay.
So another molecular pump, if you want to call it that, is mineral deficiency. Mineral deficiency creates a draw into the cell of toxic metals.
Okay.
Whereas mineral excess or mineral saturation will be a mechanism by which toxic metals are repelled from the cell or excreted, pushed out of the cell.
Okay.
Yeah? So a molecular pump that we don't understand completely yet is the mineral saturation of the cell.
Okay.
Another mechanism that has to do with the functioning of the pumps, the molecular pumps, is the cell wall itself. The cell wall is made up of fatty acids and some amino acids and some sugars.
Okay.
If there is a fatty acid imbalance in the person's diet, or again based on other aspects like genetics, the enzymes needed to split up fats and make them into the fatty acids that we needed, or if the person has parasites which are blocking the bile duct, and the bile is needed for fat absorption, and if the kid has worms, and they can't therefore excrete enough bile, or the bile flow is not appropriate to the timing of the food. You eat, and the ascaris kind of sits up in the bile duct, and the bile cannot squirt the bile salts into the gut. Fats cannot be absorbed. You recognize it very simple by smelling the stool. If it stinks, you have undigested, unabsorbed fatty acids in the stool. Yeah, that's what gives the stool a certain pungent smell. And if the stool smells, you know that there's not enough bile made to absorb the fats that are there. And over time, this will lead to a disturbance in the fatty acids that are available to the body to make healthy cell walls. And without healthy cell walls, the cell is leaky and can be penetrated easier by neurotoxins to come into the cell.
Okay.
And secondly, the cell wall is also a structural element in which all these pumps sit that we're talking about.
Okay.
And if the cell wall is defective, the pumps are kinked, they're sitting the wrong way. And just like when you have a water pump, sort of where you have to put like one hose in the water so it's immersed in the water to suck up the water. If the hose is sitting outside the water, you won't pump anything. If the pump is fallen to the side, it won't pump. You can have all the pumps there, but they have to sit in a healthy cell wall. And that's where the whole fatty acid issue comes in. The cell walls are made out of fatty acids primarily, And if there's a disturbance based on completely different, unrelated mechanisms, the cell will become toxic and then become more and more damaged. So let's kind of regroup where we are.
Okay.
So we're looking at there's mechanisms by which toxins come into the cell. There's 4 different classes of toxins.
Okay.
The person stays healthy, and this applies to grown-ups, children,
Anybody.
stays to anybody, stays healthy as long as the molecular pumps that are available are working faster than the toxins that are coming in.
Right.
So we look now at the molecular pumps. There's other mechanisms that are important that we mentioned before. Then there's the transport of toxins from the extracellular space to the excretory organs,
Okay.
which is largely done by the proteins, by cholesterol, apolipoprotein E. It's done by albumin as an important transport agent. There's many mechanisms that we have that transport toxins, the porphyrins from broken down hemoglobin are fantastic carriers of toxic metals in the blood. Hemoglobin itself is a carrier of toxic metals. Hemoglobin is a molecule that carries iron in the middle usually, but the iron can be, under certain circumstances, replaced by mercury, cadmium, lead, nickel, and so forth, and it can be used to transport other things.
Okay.
So there is the transport mechanisms which are poorly investigated so far,
Right.
from the extracellular compartment to the kidneys to the liver and so forth. Then there is the process of dismantling these toxins so they can be excreted, which are very well understood in the liver, phase 1 and phase 2
Right.
of liver detoxification. That's all the Jeffrey Blandology, I call it. Jeffrey Bland is the biochemist who kind of named many of these processes. And many moms with autistic kids have gotten stuck in just that one mechanism, just looking at the liver cells. How are they taking the toxins in, and how are they processed? First is phase 1, which kind of puts the toxins through a process where they're kind of taken apart, so they're less toxic. And phase 2 is then the actual excretion into the bile.
Okay.
And so there is that mechanism, and then there is the binding of the toxins on the way out. This describes pretty much the way out, and I don't think for the purpose of the book. Sorry, am I talking too fast?
A little bit. But if whenever's a good time, I need to take a break because I'm having some technical difficulties. So
maybe let me just kind of finish that one.
Shapes.
Let me take a thought. So
Finish one thought.
yeah, I feel we should in the book keep these terms as simple as this, without going more into detail, getting lost more.
Absolutely.
So just describing there's the way in, there's the body, there's the way out.
Right.
Let's look at those things first. And the primary causal treatments for autism have to do with reducing exposure on one side, or eliminating exposure ideally, which is an ideal that can never be had.
And they're
Reducing
just
exposure.
now starting to address that. Very recently.
I know. And on the other side, let's look at all these mechanisms that we have available to detoxify.
Right.
And the wonderful thing is, that makes it so simple, is that there's only a few of us in the whole world who have looked at this. And therefore there's only maybe 10 different things available that really achieve this. So the tools that we have are very limited, and therefore can be fairly easily grasped. It's not hundreds of them or thousands, there's just a very few tools that are available for this.
Okay.
And now, just before the break, autism is when this whole process happens in the unborn fetus who has these exposures, when the nervous system is extremely vulnerable, hasn't formed yet, and therefore the damage that occurs in the middle is more serious than when the process happens in a grown-up.
Right.
And the effect of the neurotoxins is cumulative. That means it is true, it is not the vaccines, it's not the amalgam fillings of the mother, it's not the mold exposure in the home. It's a cumulative effect of all of them. And the overt symptoms of autism happen when the last straw broke the camel's back. And the last straw that broke the camel's back in the most visible way was the vaccines. Because if the child gets vaccinated and 2 days later the child is turned autistic, there was a clear marker in time. But it wasn't the vaccine. It was the threshold that was reached where the nervous system was not able anymore to cope with it. And that's then the damage that we're looking at is then the next issue. What is the damage that occurs secondary to this primary mechanism? What is the damage that occurs? And then what has to be done to repair the damage, which is not a causal treatment of autism.
Right.
That's then a symptomatic treatment.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that results in a whole other slew of treatments that we need to clearly separate for the purpose of the book.
Right.
This is the primary mechanism. This is how we prevent autism. This is how we fix it on the deepest level to get these pumps going again. And then there's the damage that has occurred by the time we see someone, which may be profound, it may be very superficial, and
but fixable.
And fixable, yes, and absolutely fixable. And we need to look what other tools that are available for them. So let's leave it here. Let's take a break. On that one.
In your book, Dana, on the third piece, I see 3 parts. Dr. Klinkhardt laid it out very well. Is the third part the fixable parts? It seems like you define autism: the in, the pumping, the out, right? What damage is done. Maybe it's 2 parts. The second part is how do you go about fixing or repairing it?
Right.
Yeah. But it's going to flow easily in that way. Sort of like, we want to shorten that.
This is perfect.